it's wild how yeah, for so long there seems to have been this kind of I don't know, let's look up aversion to nuclear power. Yet there's all this kind of like amazing technology that's been developed to uh, expand its use.
Yeah, there's a very strong and well-funded anti-nuclear activist lobby that has had a lot of momentum for the last few decades, and then they really ram home the Chernobyl and Fukushima as a reminder that nuclear power is bad. But you could there's been other plant accidents and various incidences that dwarf the amount of devastation caused by the nuclear accidents. Like that explosion that happened in Beirut a few years ago, like that was more devastating than all of the nuclear disasters combined.
Really?
Yeah, like
I guess
thousands
so, yeah.
of people died in that.
Did they? Thousands? Can you
at least a few hundred? Like it was right in the middle of a port in a major city.
I remember seeing
it. And it was just fertilizer that was left unattended for probably at least a few years, decades.
I remember seeing the footage of that. It was wild.
It says at least 218 deaths.
And so we know
7,000 injuries.
Wow. And did it say the cost of the damage?
Property damage, 15+ billion.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
In a country that cannot afford it.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I heard recently that only one person died at Fukushima, and that's been contested. And the number, I can't remember the number for Chernobyl, but I've got a feeling it's like 24.
Yeah, it's like a few dozen.
28.
Yeah, there's only a few dozen that can be directly attributed to radiation.
Actual deaths.
Yeah.
But
approximately 30.
Approximately 30. I wonder if that's people they're talking about people who died
immediately.
Yeah. I'm wondering how, because there must have been an increase in cancers.
It said in the seconds to months after the disaster. Actually, this isn't it.
Yeah.
I think maybe it says 60, but I don't know how they even pull that.
But even that, because if you didn't know, if somebody said to you, Danny, like prior to all this, how many people do you think were killed as a result of Chernobyl? I would have said thousands.
You'd guess at least.
I'd assume thousands got cancers and died.
The way that it gets hyped up, that is what a lot of people believe if they're not properly educated on the topic.
With Chernobyl, what happened? What caused that? I mean, outside of you can place accusations on Soviet Russia and incompetent management and processes, but what was the actual cause of the meltdown?
I believe they were doing a test that required them to turn off some of their safety mechanisms. I think they were trying to see what would happen when they would just let the reactor wind down naturally. But from what I understand, that there was a lot of stored energy in the graphite that's used to contain the reactor. And then something happened, and then it created a steam explosion. And then it just went, once the steam explosion blew out the reactor core, then that caused wider issues with releasing the radiation from inside of the reactor.
It could have been a lot worse, though, right?
Oh yeah,
we know of. Is it the 3 guys who had to swim under, and there was something to do with under? There was something was leaking. I seem to remember it from. I don't know if I remember it from reading about it, or it was from the not the documentary. Did you watch the series, the Chernobyl series?
I have not actually watched that one.
Oh, it's incredible. It's brilliant. It's well worth watching. But my understanding of Chernobyl is that it could have been a lot worse.
Yes.
Whereas Fukushima Fukushima slightly different, is that it was more because of its location with regards to the earthquake.
It's also hard to quantify how the cost of Chernobyl being basically a wasteland ever since.
Well, and the immediate cleanup.
What a lot of people actually don't know about Chernobyl is that there was 2 other reactors on that site that continued operating for another decade.
Really?
Yeah.
I never knew that.
Yeah, they kept them going. And now the area around Chernobyl is quite the robust wildlife preserve that's been doing quite well from what I understand.
Fish.
Yeah. Simpsons did not do a good job of promoting the nuclear industry.
But actually, that's something I was told, is that...
That's what Harry Suddock said,
Yeah,
wasn't
Harry
it?
Suddock. Was it Harry? Harry said The Simpsons actually had a real negative... it's been really bad for the nuclear industry.
Well, because it had imagery of Mr. Burns storing barrels of green goop in a neighborhood park and just crap like that. It just throws off people's perspective, and they see the green fuel rods. It's it's not like that at all.
So with what we'll separate Chernobyl and Fukushima. With what happened at Chernobyl, what is the risk of similar kind of meltdowns or its reactors now? I mean, are they so safe that it's almost impossible to happen?
CANDU reactors are the safest design in the world. From what I understand, they have at least 3, maybe I think 4 fail-safes that will result in them if an incident were to happen that the reactor would be shut down, and they would they would drop the moderator rods in, and that would reduce the criticality of the reaction and slow down the production of neutrons. Or if it was worse, they have a chemical poison that would be dropped into the reactor that would completely cease all reactivity within the reactor. But the difference between those two applications is if you just have to drop the moderator rods, like that's an easily recoverable situation. Whereas if you have to completely poison the reactor chemistry, you have a very costly process of recovering from that. Because the entire the reactor chemistry needs to be reconfigured from scratch.
Right. So that's a last case scenario.
Yeah. But it's incredibly unlikely for that to even occur. Like these reactors are built like with defense in depth for all their safety measures, that the likelihood of them even coming close to that situation is incredibly rare, but it's required to have that backup just in case that incredibly rare event were ever to happen. Like in Fukushima, they did not expect to get hit by an earthquake and then a tsunami. And then had they had their backup generators at a higher elevation, they would have been able to sustain cooling power to the reactor that would have prevented the reactor from going critical and releasing radiation into the environment.
Yeah, so how does that actually happen? How does radiation get into the environment? What's gone wrong at that point?
Well, it's mostly like from the steam explosions, because that just releases a lot of energy, but that steam is in the vicinity of nuclear material, fissile material, so it will carry with it the fissile material and then release that into the atmosphere, like stuff like cesium and then tritium in the water.
But if radiation is so dangerous, and it was released into the atmosphere at Fukushima and certainly at Chernobyl, are the risks of radiation overstated?
They are. The radiation, from the reactor accidents, like the really dangerous nuclides that come out of an accident are very short-lived. So they're only dangerous for a very short time, like a few months to a few years.
I mean, I wouldn't say a few years is a short time.
True. Well, relative to the grand scheme of things.
So why have they stayed out of like Chernobyl for so long? Just
perspective, or public perception, just everyone just scared of the situation, because it was very, very hyped up as a scary situation.
And they did to build a massive iron dome to put over it, right?
Yeah, they entombed it in a large, they just dumped concrete in there and just...
Why did they do that?
Just to contain it, because concrete has good moderating properties to absorb neutrons, so it really prevents any potential of a criticality accident from reoccurring if there is any radioactive fissile material still present at the site.
So you would say then, therefore, nuclear as a source for energy generation is what, the safest or one of the safest
per kilowatt hour generated? Yeah.
So the lobbyists, the people who are against nuclear, what is their, try and put yourself in their shoes of their rational arguments. What are their rational arguments against nuclear?
It's expensive. It takes a long time to build. And when there is an accident, it is incredibly sensational. But
expensive is a problem that can be solved through economies of scale.
Yeah.
The length of time to create, I mean, if you want this sort of energy, you got to start at some point. And again, that will become more efficient over time. So I'm thinking more with regards to their concerns with regards to danger in the environment. So these people who are uneducated.
Some of the older reactor designs, like their concerns were more founded, but as the technology has matured, they haven't really seemed to update to keep up with it. So they still repeat the same talking points that they did in the 80s,
Which were.
which just it's dangerous, expensive, it takes forever to build.
But what
Like,
is the danger in the old reactors?
it's just that they don't have they don't fail into a safe state if something were to go wrong. They require active measures to shut down the reactor if it goes supercritical.
The other thing would be the waste, right?
Yes, waste is the other issue, which it's not a large footprint that the waste takes up because of the huge density of uranium, the energy density. But we do have several proposed ideas of how to manage that waste. One of them being a deep geological repository. I think they've started building one in Finland, and there's proposals for various sites in Canada to build them as well. It's just they're limestone caverns that have the appropriate geography that water does not pass through at a very quick rate. These formations have existed already for tens of thousands of years, and they don't expect any changes in them for another tens of thousands of years. And like I said, like when fuel is pulled out of a reactor and it's irradiated, the primary hazard is in the first few years when there's the more dangerous nuclides present.
So the waste, is this the rods themselves once they've been fully used, or is there a green goo of some kind?
No, it's.
I wish there was a green
Yeah,
goo.
well, like the most liquid radiological waste is the tritium that comes out of these. But there's potential, like tritium is potentially going to be the fuel for fusion reactors.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Fusion reactors. Let's stick with fission for the moment.
Yeah.
So there's more than one types of waste. There's the rods themselves.
There's the rods themselves that are potentially fissile. They need to be stored in lead casks. When they're pulled out of the reactor, they're kept in large pools that are to keep them cool while the harmful nuclides slowly decay. And then once they reach a certain threshold where they're determined to be safe to handle, they get stored in lead casks.
Not drums.
No,
There are no drums anywhere with nuclear waste. Maybe in Russia.
they like. There was a good podcast recently. Dr. Chris Kiefer on the Decoupled podcast. He was talking with Mark Nelson about the deep geological repositories that are being built in Canada.
So where are they currently stored?
Most of them just remain on site because they don't take up much space. So, but the plan is to move them into the repositories once the facilities are built. But then that's another chicken and egg thing. You got to go through all the licensing and regulatory, and there has to be community buy-in from the communities that these things are going to be hosted in, because they're one is being proposed on the Bruce Peninsula near the Bruce reactor, and another more further out in northern Ontario in Ignace.
I'm going to make Jeremy proud now because they covered this in The Fifth Risk. Have you heard of the book The Fifth Risk?
Nope.
It's a book I read a while back, which I seem to bring up in every show after that point. But they talked about the differences between the US and Russia and how they deal with spent fusion materials. And I think they talked in Russia, they just pour concrete over it. But there's certain regulations, for example, in the US with regards to how it's stored and where it's stored. But they also talked about the amount of, I want to say something like all the nuclear waste in the world that's ever been created would be like smaller than a football field or something.
Yeah, it would be one football field stacked two telephone poles high.
That's about it. I think that's about what I heard. But if we were to increase the number of reactors, that would go up. So we would need something.
Potentially. But the beauty of some of these new reactors is that some of them will be able to use that reprocessed fuel as their fuel to operate.
Huh. So you can reuse. How can you reuse it?
The conventional reactors only get about 5, maybe 10% of the available energy out of the uranium in the fuel rods because of their designs. And then if they want to use a process called pyroprocessing, where they dissolve the spent fuel rods into a molten salt and then use an electrolytic process to purify it to just the fissile material that's required for a generating reactor. And then that will be able to get potentially another 70 to 80, maybe even 90% of the energy out of these spent fuel. And then that will reduce them to a lot safer nuclides that aren't as long-lived and mostly inert salts that can be stored safely like any other industrial output.